Okay, update on crypto here. My last update just a few days ago, Ether was above 2000. We're now in the 1700 area, threatening to go back to 1400, which was the high from, the previous like the previous major cycle top in January 2018. And so that is really important to sort of acknowledge what happens when we get down to that level. Do we see a wick below? Do we get closer to the 1000 range? I think that's all very likely. Now, just a reminder, based on previous history, you would expect we get our low in Ether around October, maybe September. So if it comes around October, that would be a 16-month cycle. If we get it in September, that's about 15. So call it somewhere in there. These numbers aren't going to be precise. This is just based on the pattern from previous, declines. Of course, we had this really short one that was a really aggressive decline. Like if we, so from this top to this low, right, that was your 90% sort of drawdown. And so it actually makes sense that that only took 9 months because a decline that just in that of that magnitude, it makes sense that you would wash out like basically people would sellers would run out of things to sell sooner than the cycle had time to bottom, if that makes sense. In the same way that if something goes parabolic and just goes crazy, you're going to get an early high because it just can't be sustained. There aren't enough buyers. There's not enough capital to sustain that kind of parabolic rise. In this case, it's sort of the reverse. There aren't enough sellers to keep sort of pushing the price down. I mean, once it's down 90%, it's like, okay, so is it going to go down 99%? And so we're probably 4 or 5 months away, 3 to 5 months away, let's call it. It's interesting that they're talking about the merge potentially being in August. I know people thought it was going to be around June before. There was talk of October. So it feels like we're probably going to get our low somewhere around the merge. I think there's a lot of skepticism around the merge. There are a lot of people that think the merge is not going to happen, right? There was going to be some kind of big technical challenge, that it's not going to deliver what it promised. There are a lot of reasons for people to be bearish. And so it kind of makes sense that if and when we get sort of positive confirmation of the merge's success in some way, that is going to be the catalyst that people are going to use to kind of try to front run ETH. And so Bitcoin, similar kind of situation. I'd say decline could last even longer because we're probably looking at the 4 year cycle low, which is like, later this month, like this year, like maybe even December. And so these are monthly charts. If we'll look at the weekly, this is important to note. We have had 7 red weeks for Ether in a row. And let's just pull this up and look at them together. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Excuse me. That's 8. Wow. 8, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 8 red weeks in a row, right? And you could have 4 or 5, you could have 8 months, you could have 8 red months in a row. That still doesn't mean you didn't have a few green weeks here and there, right? And this is 2 solid months where there wasn't a single green candle. That has never happened before, right? Look at this decline. Even as bad as this decline was, there were a few green candles. And just to be really crystal clear, a green candle just means that the price closed higher than where it opened, right? So wherever it opened for that week, it closed higher. So red is the opposite, means it closed lower than where it opened. So that's the quintessential definition of down, right? Like if it's closing lower than it opened, then it's moving lower. And so we've been doing that for 8 straight weeks, which has never happened, even in this huge bear. So that chart we just looked at where we went down 90%, let's just kind of confirm here. I believe this is your 90% decline, right? Yeah, just to be clear. So that monthly chart we just looked at with the 90% decline, this is the weekly version of that, right? And so this is important. Let's zoom in here. Like this is like a history lesson. That's why I love charts. You don't have to have been there and actually traded it to understand, to have a flavor of what happened, as long as you understand how to, read price action, how to parse what the data is telling you. So we had this 90% decline. Let's just add slightly different. Right, okay. So we'll start here and then we'll end there. So we had this 90% decline that happened over the course of 31 weeks. 31 weeks. So, a little bit more than half a year. And of course, we had started falling at that point, right? So this is actually, and that's interesting, right? So let's see, what is that decline? Right, that's your 94% decline. So from here all the way down here is 94%. But let's say that you actually got in like around, let's say here or something, or like here. So then you experienced something closer to a 90% decline, or maybe even if you got in like around here, then you experienced maybe like an 85% decline or whatever. But let's say you got in at this candle here, you were like, oh, I'm feeling bullish now, and then you just rode this down for 31 weeks. Notice even in those 31 weeks, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's not even count this. 9, 10. So at least 10 green weeks. Now, granted, some of those green weeks were like really ugly. Like, I mean, this is a doozy of a green week. But this was fine. This was probably hard to live through, given there was a huge sort of decline. You had even 2 green weeks in a row where you made a higher high. Again, think about that. This, in hindsight, we know became a 90% decline. So in the middle of what would become a 90% decline, you're going to have even a couple week periods where you're making a higher high on the weekly. So just to be like crystal clear, this is a higher high. Like this candle made a higher high above that. And so you're like, oh, I'm looking pretty good, right? And so the point there is that this 8 weeks in a row of decline is unprecedented. Let's see if we go back to, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row. That's going back to 2016. Oh, yeah. Even here, let's say we count this doji as red. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, well, that's interesting. So if we count this doji as red, it's not really red. It's technically it's technically green, right? Because I think it probably closed, let's say, a penny above the open or whatever it was. But like in spirit, this is a pretty bearish candle. Although in real time, you could have tried to look for this as a sign of a bullish reversal. But this was 9 weeks, 9 red weeks, call it quote unquote red. So at 8 weeks is not maybe completely unprecedented, but this tells you we should be getting a bounce soon. I mean, we've got to be getting a bounce. It's like things can't go up in a straight line. They can't just fall in a straight line either. Again, I'll just to kind of reiterate, even if let's say we're making a move to let's say 1,000, you'd expect at some point we get a bounce. Wait, sorry about that. You'd expect at some point we get a bounce, right? Like we maybe make a move there, and then it's like, oh, are we going up? No, we're not. It's like, okay, and like we maybe end up down at like 840, right? That would be a hell of a buying opportunity. Like, I think the best way to think about these things is in terms of market cap. And you think about, we're at like a $200 million market cap right now. Or excuse me, $200 billion market cap. So if we were to get cut in half from here, more than cut in half, that gets you down to a $100 billion market cap. Like that is a juicy opportunity. When you think about Ether as a multi-trillion dollar asset, to be able to get it for 200 billion or even 100 billion, you're talking about really, really nice, huge multiples in terms of return. And so finally, I'll look at the daily chart just to kind of like zoom in on the action, if you will, to get a sense of, what day we are in the daily cycle. Because on the weekly cycle, just to go back to that, we're on week 17. These cycles tend to go like 30-ish weeks. So if we play that out, right, that would mean we would expect we might get our low around some point in August, right? And this is where it starts to get interesting as you think about how the cycles interact with each other. And it's like, well, if we get a weekly cycle low here, does that mean that's going to be our longer term low? Is that going to be our monthly cycle low? And that's what we're going to have to see. It could also be the case that we just get a much longer weekly cycle, and that's what I would suspect. We maybe get a really long weekly cycle that's like 35 weeks, so it feels like it's never going to end. We just keep going. It's like, because we're only on week 17, so that would mean another 17 weeks. So that's, another 4 months. So that seems like the more likely scenario, right? We continue to go lower, and then all of this consolidate, all of this turns into the fuel for a huge rally higher. And so if we look at the daily cycle, just to get a precise count, so we're on week 17 of the weekly cycle. And for the daily cycle, so first off, we had our high on day 3 of the daily cycle. That is incredibly bearish, but not unprecedented by any means. That actually happened, like, we had a 5-day top, a top on day 5 for, the cycle that kind of, this was the top, this was the low from that top, and this was the quote unquote recovery from that low. So this is definitely a really bad harbinger, right? So this is day 3, this is day 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, day 15. And so these cycles tend to be in the 50 to 60 day range. And so if we're only on day 15 and our high already happened on day 3, my God, that is a really, really bad sign. Because if you just take it at face value, that means another 35 or 45 days of decline. And on top of that, remember, that's just the daily cycle, right? So let's play that out, because we played out the weekly cycle going to 30 days. Let's say the daily cycle goes to 60, right? So this was our first day, and then if we go to 60 days, that's interesting. So that gives us a low in mid-July. And so this is the other sort of trick as you think about cycles, because they're nested inside each other, right? And so you want to think about daily cycles happen within weekly cycles, and weekly cycles happen within, yearly cycles, and those happen within even larger cycles. And so if we're in week 17 of a weekly cycle, and we think the weekly cycle ends on week 34, we can try to figure out how many daily cycles that means. And so if this one that we're in right now, this daily cycle goes until, call it mid-July, and then we have another one that's, and we're just being really, really, just simplified here. Say that's another 60 days. So that gives you a low in September for that next daily cycle. And so this is where, the more advanced, experience and, understanding how things interplay with each other comes in that I would be, given where we are, it's going to be more accurate to get a sense of how the daily cycles are going to play out, and then use that to ladder up to the weekly, and then use that to ladder up to those yearly cycles. So for Ether, the yearly cycle tends to be around 15 months long. And so it seems like what I could see happening, right, is we get a sort of, so this cycle was 75 days, the one that just the one right before this one. So we could see a world where this next daily cycle is actually just in the, let's say it's in the 50 something day range. It's not quite as long as 60, because we had a really long one before. And then we get a pretty long weekly cycle that's kind of similar to this one, where it just wears everybody out and we just really go lower. And so that could be how the rest of this decline, this could be our roadmap into that larger low, that 15-month cycle low, maybe around the $1,000 range. Doesn't mean it has to be that low. There's no reason it has to be, but like we're certainly, all of this, like we're certainly setting up for like a huge puke. And I know we've already puked, but there are pukes on different time frames, right? Like we're right now doing a sort of monthly puke, or I should say, it's more of a weekly puke. When we have a monthly puke, that's when you could see yourself down to something like a 700, 1,000, 800, that kind of area. So all that to say, though, this is going to set up an incredible opportunity. So I'm going to be watching these daily cycles very closely, just trying to get a sense of when we might be getting close to that final long-term low, that back the truck up moment to buy Ether.